Yeah, see? Told you, she's gonna come sit on my work and make a nuisance of herself because I happen to be on the floor. Cats and sewing projects. Like moths to flame, ma'am. No, not on the bodice, please, madam. Hey, it's Alirien, and today, or rather tonight, because I am filming this currently at 8 p.m., but it's fine. I am finally starting the process of rebuilding Alyce Pestle's bodice and improving on the original. I have already gone ahead and traced off the pattern onto manila paper. I'm going to use the same pattern that I used last time. It is Butterick B4699, and it is 3 pieces. The front, which goes here, the side, which wraps from the front princess line around to the back princess line underneath the arm, and the back, which is cut on the fold for the center back. So 3 pieces, each one cut twice, once for the lining, once for the outer fabric. And it does say to interface this as well. I am going to do a bit of research to figure out what sort of stiffener I actually want to use on this. I tried wooden boning last time and it didn't work very well. There were several spots where it broke or bent uncomfortably when bending at the waist. And I know in one of the spots where it broke, it was poking right here, directly underneath the bust, which is not comfortable. So we are going to rebuild this and make sure it's much more comfortable for the long term. I'm probably not going to use any form of boning, however, because it wouldn't have been a thing available. It isn't a thing available to her. I am going to do some digging to figure out if I could use a really, really stiff interfacing, not unlike the craft stabilizer I used for my e-tabag panels. Or I heard tell from someone that perforated leather was also often an option. There's also the option, this probably was also a later practice, so it might not work for rebuilding Alyce's bodice since she is from the Elizabethan era, but cording and thick paper were often also used. Now I don't want to use paper because ideally I would like to be able to throw this in the washing machine to launder it because the first one cannot be washed that way. And at some point I may open that one up and remove the wooden boning to replace it with a synthetic baleen, but we are going to hold off on that. For now, I'm going to focus on just rebuilding the bodice from what I have left of that linen, because I should have enough at least for the outer layer. If I don't have enough for both layers, the outside and inside, then I will go get some cotton lining. Not a big deal. As I said, I've already traced off the pattern onto manila paper, so I have a thicker option. I will need to press that one flat. There's the back, and here's the side piece. So now I'm going to lay out my muslin and trace this off to cut out 2 of the back and 4 of the front and side. And I suppose I'll go ahead and interface it. I have some woven interfacing. So I will do that because this is just the mock-up for now, the toile, if you will. And we will get this mock-up made. I might not get it all done tonight. I'm hoping to have at least the mock-up done by the end of the day Monday, because on Monday I have another video I want to start editing. I'm trying to find a balance between my sewing work and my editing work. Let me pull out the muslin and get these traced and pinned and cut. Go from there. Oh, and I'm not going to worry about finishing any edges or anything like that. I am going to make it fully lined so that I have a better sense of how thick it will be, and I'm going to interface it. Yeah, I'll go ahead and interface it just so I have an idea of the thickness that's intended from the pattern. Put it on over just the shift, because the shift was the only form of undergarment, and see where the neckline falls as well, and see if I'm happy with that, and with all the rest of the fit. And we will go from there. When you worry, I worry. It's no hurry, cause we got all the time we need. If we're in love, then we'll succeed. I had to get this fitted because because of the low neckline of this combined with the low neckline of the undergarment that is going underneath it, I had to make sure that that was done off camera and off stream. We have gotten to that point. I have pinned, have done some marking. I'm gonna do a bit more marking. What's gonna happen now is I'm gonna clean up the marking that I've made here, take out these safety pins, mark the other pinning here on this bust seam. Then I'm gonna go grab my seam ripper and we're gonna start pulling apart these pieces so that I can trace off the new markings onto some fresh paper for the new version of the pattern. There's not that much that needs to change really, which is a good thing. We're taking in the upper section of the front bust seam, and I'm actually going to bring in the front. I'm also going to lengthen the bust from its current waist seam. The back doesn't need to change at all. I wanted y'all to see my temporary fastening to stand in for the lacing, because this does lace up the center front, is I stuck safety pins on either side. Here, let me turn it this way. There are safety pins. I'm trying to turn this so y'all can see. Here, I'll just like put it on myself because it's not the final size anyway, so it doesn't really matter how it looks on me. I put the big safety pins here and the small ones here and hooked the safety pins together, and that stood in for the lacing to hold it taut to the body so that I could make the pinning here. That worked out pretty well. I'm gonna do it in pen first and then go over it with Sharpie, and then hopefully I can see that through the manila paper and just trace it straight onto the manila paper. If I need things to be flat, I'll just go get scissors and cut it back apart rather than seam ripping, because the seam ripping is gonna take forever. Once I get the new pattern traced, I'll go grab some muslin and we'll get the new version cut out. We'll cut out the interfacing and we'll go from there depending on how much time we still have to fill. Let me get all these safety pins out first. Excuse me. Hi. I'm on the floor trying to work, so somebody had to come impose herself. One thing I will say though that did make me proud is when I went in the other room to get some extra opinions on how this looked. When we did the fitting, my mother said that she thought it already looked much better than the original bodice. That felt really good. Marking off adjustments to a pattern on a mock-up is always one of the tricky things. I'm trying to cut the thread more than anything else, but this is the quick way of pulling this apart instead of sitting here for 2 hours with a seam ripper and getting absolutely nowhere. Carefully trace the edge here. And the most important part when adjusting patterns and drawing your own patterns for costumes, label the bitch. Because especially if you make multiple mock-ups, if you make multiple versions of the pattern, you need to know which version you're looking at, how recent it is, what size it is, what it's meant for, especially if you make a bunch of dresses of similar cut but slightly different construction methods. Or, for instance, right now I'm working on 2 different Renaissance period garbs, and one is for a commoner and one is for nobility. These are vastly different things, but some of the pieces will tend to blur together in the shapes and the sizes. So I need to make sure I'm not using Alice's pattern for Sybil or vice versa, because I could get Alice in a lot of trouble, or Sybil will just not be very happy. So, Alice, BB2. I'm gonna cut just outside of my lines so that I don't lose any of the size fidelity. Don't make the mistake I did the first time by just picking up and moving your piece 2 times, because that is how you end up with one piece of interfacing being on the inside of the lining instead of on the inside of the outer shell, and potentially confusing yourself. Don't be like me, be better than me. Fabric time. My weight hit the cutting board, and the cutting board tried to go whee! We will cut off this swath of muslin, and I will fold it. That way I don't have to worry about the big bolt, and I should be able to get 2 of each piece. Well, I need 4 of the front and side pieces, and 2 of the back. Put the fabric on top. And we're just gonna Google, how were bodices stiffened before steel? And we'll see if we can find a result about the Elizabethan era. History of corsets, 16th and 17th centuries. That sounds like what I need, since these ladies live right around 1560. Usually they were underwear, not outer. Made of layered fabrics like linen and silk, stiffened with starch and whalebone. So I do need some starch. Dags and I were discussing earlier that I could use starch, and so it did occur to me. A busk typically made of wood, ivory, metal, or whalebone was added to stiffen the front. So since I'm not making a true pair of bodies, which is grandmother corset, as I like to affectionately call it, there will be no like center spot for the busk. This bodice for Alyce laces in the front center, so there's no spot for it. While a few surviving bodies exist that are structured with steel or iron, these are generally considered to have been orthopedic or novelty constructions and were not worn as part of mainstream fashion, though some historians believe they were not worn at all. That makes sense. Survivor bias in garment history is a big deal. By the end of the 16th century, bodies were commonly worn. Okay, so that doesn't really quite give me what I want. So starch is one. Milliner's take on Tudor corsets. This is effectively what I need. Take a bodice pattern that's too small, sew a bunch of boning channels in it, a little jiggery pokery to get the boning in, seal the edges, and presto changeo, you have a corset. Here's another method that relies on stiff sheets of interlining rather than multiple thin bones. That's what I need! Using fabrics that have been treated with glue or paste sizing to give them stiffness is a very old construction technique. It's largely out of fashion in today's styles. Oh, spandex, you cheeky little monkey. But it's still, I love this writing. I love your writing style. I love your writing voice. Thank you, Missa. It's still used in millinery, upholstery, drapery, shoemaking, and bookbinding. We're talking about buckram and pasteboard. This is a period means of stiffening a bodice. Pasteboard. What is pasteboard? Thin, firm board made of sheets of paper pasted together or pressed paper pulp. Okay, basically playing card paper. So if I just get a particularly stiff interlining, buckram, that's something I should look into. Yeah, buckram or tarlatan. Stiff cotton, though occasionally linen or horsehair cloth with a plain, usually loose weave produced in various weights, similar to muslin or other plain weave fabrics. Soaked in a sizing agent such as wheat starch paste, glue like PVA glue or pyroxylin, a nitrocellulose developed around okay, so I wouldn't necessarily want that, but it's going on the inside, nobody's gonna can see it. Then dried. When re-wetted or warmed, it can be shaped to create durable, firm fabric for book covers, hats, and elements of clothing. And the wonderful thing about the bodice is it's being worn against the core of the body's heat, so it will naturally reshape to fit the body better over time. So, buckram. Amazon sells it. Judith M. Millinery. Burnley and Trowbridge sells it. Perfect! Burnley and Trowbridge is who I got my linen from. I should have looked them up before. There they are. Burnley and Trowbridge is a wonderful company. They are based in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm not sponsored, by the way. They make historic fabrics and garment supplies and other patterns from other people, like red threaded patterns are in here as well. Let me see. Buckram. Okay, so this is the main one. Natural paste buckram. Extremely coarse linen, loosely woven and stiffened with plant gum. Our version made of jute is heavily starched, so it's a good choice for any garment or headwear where a strong structure is required. Suitable for 16th century bodies, additional structure for stays, kirtles, headdresses. That is what we will use. It will take some time to get here, but that's okay. I have one more mock-up to work on while I wait.
Alright, so the new bodice mock-up is done enough, and obviously the dress form is not capable of squishing the way that a human body does, but already I think I'm much happier with it. I don't think I will square off the neckline now that I'm looking at it, because in doing that, I'm gonna lose some of this width on the strap, and I think it might be better to just have the peak of the neckline here. I also don't think I am going to make those gathers more prominent. I think I like the kiss of gathering without it being super ruffled, because the other thing is if I do make these gathers more prominent, that means it's more material that this bodice is having to pull in, and that will affect how well it's able to shape and close the way that it is supposed to. So we haven't done the proper fitting yet to see how it fits on the actual body, but I am happy with how this currently looks, because I think it is going to help, especially once it's got that inner layer providing a lot more structure and a hint of padding. I think it's going to do a lot to help bring the bust in and make everything much more shapely and much better defined. I think the one thing I may need to do, and we'll know this after doing the fitting, is potentially flare part of the base here. I need to add a bit more around the hip line or take it up a little bit. Obviously this part needs to be removed. We may need to flare something in order to accommodate the hips better, because this form does not have the hips that Alyce has. So yeah, that is my one concern now, is how the hips will be handled. But over this smock, it is fitting beautifully. I think I'm pretty happy with these. Again, we'll do the final fitting for the bodice to see if we're completely happy with that pattern, and if we are, we will move forward. So I will need tomorrow, because I stream tonight, so tomorrow I will go get the cotton lining and I will order the buckram. You know, as soon as the buckram is here, we will be able to finish off this bodice. I think this works. I think this will work. So we'll do this fitting and go from there. I'm working on fixing Alyce's bodice pattern, tracing off another version. I will be cutting it out. I'm lining this up at the shoulder because it's the one spot that's basically the exact same. And luckily I don't really have to make a full mock-up again, because it's just the front piece that I'm changing out. With any amount of grace, I can just cut out 2 of this from muslin, which I will do now, pop it onto the last mock-up I made. We will fit that, and hopefully that works. I didn't give myself enough fabric. We're gonna pull some piecing, because A, it's just a mock-up, and B, piecing is period. Okay, took what I'm gonna call 3 mock-ups in total. I did 2 full mock-ups and then pulled the front pieces off of this twice to test 2 more fits. But this seems, don't pay attention to how it's fitting on the form. The form is not the correct size, but this seems to be right. As right as it can be without putting lacing and stuff in it, which I'm not gonna worry about for a mock-up. So I'm gonna move forward with this version, and it will probably get shortened by the end of it, but I will worry about that on the final one, because I can cut down the waist on that and then bind it, and that will secure that. We're nearly there, we're nearly there. We have finalized our mock-ups. We have one final cut, so I just have to sew a final, cut another final, and sew another final, and finish off some filming. But I think that is enough cracking my head against a wall for one evening. Just tomorrow, bodice Friday is what we're looking. Yeah, I'm excited to get to Sybil's garb. Not that I don't like working on Alyce's, I've just, you know, had my fill of frustration with the commoner garb, and I want a different set of frustrations. I want to go from trying to structure a garment that can't have boning in it to being frustrated with millions of boning channels in a pair of bodies. I am perpetually learning, as I think any craftsman of any form of craft or art really should be doing. This is the lining material. I will not be cutting it out tonight because unfortunately it does need to be pre-shrunk, so I need to run it through the wash and the dryer before I cut it to make sure it's going to be the size it'll be. I think it's so pretty. I thought those went together pretty well, especially once I have the hem tape on there as well. But I think that's so pretty with the micro floral print on there. Alyce will enjoy it too. And I could talk for hours about a lot of this stuff. As you saw on stream, I got most of the fabric cut out. I got the lining cut out the other day, and I've already gone ahead and attached the interfacing to the linen, and I'm going to baste the buckram onto that from there, because all of the structure should be against the exterior fabric. I'm gonna do very, very little to the lining except attach it at the very end. So what's gonna happen here, I will get the outer shell all the way together as far as possible, and then I am going to cut the lengths of cording that I need in all of the spaces that I need it. I will run my twill tape, of which I have far more packs than I probably need, but I wanted to be
very safe on this one. And then I will get the lining section put all the way together, stitch the outside to the lining. I'll make the markings for the eyelets, put in the eyelets, but we'll try it on and see how much lacing is needed to actually lace it up to size. The goal is to spiral lace. That is the order of operations we will be following. Of course, I have sat down to start working and immediately my stomach says I need food. So I'm gonna go eat and then we will get as far into this as we can this evening. Hopefully finish tomorrow. Let's go eat and then we will start attaching some buckram and building a bodice shell. The buckram has been basted on. You'll be able to see it more easily from this side. There's sort of a mint green stitch there with the blue linen, and I stitched as close to the edge as possible so that the basting, any basting that got left in the final garment would not be noticeable. And I've gotten the fronts stitched to the sides, so now I'm going to trim away the buckram that is in the seam allowance of these pieces and press these seam allowances flat.
Sticking to so as to make room over my fingers and then going to
I need to remember to pause that before I start recording. I got these pressed and got the, well, other way around. I got the buckram trimmed at its seam allowance and got these pressed open. And now I am attaching the back at the shoulders and then at the side. Technically, I am going against, sorry, the focus went out for a minute there. I am going against the instructions on this pattern once again. It actually instructs you to leave the sides open and wants you to like get partway through attaching the binding. I don't know, it's weird. It wants you to start binding the armhole, get to a certain point, and then bring the entirety of the bodice, the lining layer and the outer shell layer, all together in one seam allowance on the inside, and then bind that inside seam allowance. I think that's a weird way to do that bulk. What they want to happen is for you to not have to do some weird overlap or reconnect of the armhole of the armscye edge binding. But honestly, I did it the way that made more sense to me the first time and it worked perfectly fine. As long as the like gap in the edge binding for the armscye is toward the back where the seam allowance is anyway, most people are never going to notice that detail anyway, especially if you got all kind of other stuff going on your garb. We're gonna do that the same way. So I'm attaching the shoulders first, partially because I screwed up and added too much seam allowance to the front pieces, I have realized. Because one thing that has happened in, sorry, didn't realize I was tilting it. One thing that has happened in me adjusting this pattern is some of the notches got lost. So I am having to be more careful about where I'm lining things up. Lining up the front to the side has worked out, and as far as the side to the back, I'm just gonna match it at the base. So I'm not too terribly worried about that, but for those of you who are getting into pattern making or pattern adjusting or any sort of customization of sewing patterns, try to make sure you are transferring your notches every single time so that you are not dealing with issues like I am dealing with. I ended up not needing the section for ease stitching on mine, so that's why the front and the side were fine without their markings, but try to take all of the precautions to make sure your notches get transferred to every new version of the pattern, and that you mark those notches on your fabric every time you go to sew up the pattern. Don't be like me, be better than me. Yeah, I'm gonna stitch the other shoulder and then get the sides stitched and do the same thing. Trim out the buckram in the seam allowance and press the seam allowance flat. And just like that, there's the outer shell all stitched together, and this buckram has made it very stiff. I will definitely need to shorten it before I do any of the binding. Hang on. The buckram was a good pick, I'll say that. There we go. I'll get the lining pieces together tomorrow, and then we will start working on getting the cording in place in here to stiffen up the seam lines. Basically, I'm going to cut a length of cording along each of the 4 seam allowances, and then I'm going to put 2 lengths on the inside of each
front center edge. One right along this front edge, and then I'll figure out how big around the eyelet should be and leave enough space for those eyelets to fit, and then do a secondary length on the opposite side of those eyelets, just to reinforce it the same way I would with a corset or a set of stays with some boning. So that'll be 8 lengths of cording for the whole thing. I'll probably stop the cording right about here because this should be even. My front edges go down a little bit too far, so I'll need to trim those before binding. We will take care of the rest tomorrow.
Good afternoon. It's actually not the next day, but the day after that. We are gonna get this done today. So I have just pinned one of the front and one of the side pieces of the lining together, and I'm about to stitch together all of the lining pieces the same way I did with the outer shell, get that all trimmed and pressed, and then once that's together, I will run the cording inside the outer shell. Is all together and it is hung up the door right there. I guess I'll show you up close and actually turn the overhead light on this time. There's the lining all together. I have measured and cut all of my lengths of cording that are going into this. So front edge, eyelet edge, side seam, back seam, back seam, side seam, eyelet edge, front edge. And they are specifically laid out in the order that I cut them for the seam allowance areas. I'm going to run the twill tape. I'm going to stitch the 2 lengths that go on the front edges first, because those are going to be affected by the fact that they are right up against the front edge. And then I'm trying to figure out the best way to go about stitching down the other ones. I will need to switch my thread to all of my light blue for after I do this length and the other very, very front edge, because that'll be underneath edge binding. I'm going to switch to the light blue to make sure that all of the exterior stitching is as invisible as possible. So we're gonna run the twill tape in. I'm still kind of undecided of how exactly I want to do it on these 4 seam allowances, but I will figure something out. But once I do the twill tape, I'll figure out how the cording goes in, and I'll try to talk through that process if I think about it. Once the cording's on, we attach the lining. So let's do the twill tape before I ramble any further.
Downward landing off that side.
I had to pull my hair back. I was getting warm, partly because I'm very nervous about this cording thing. This is the first time I've done it, but I did a little looking, and the way typically you would do it is add the cording to whatever fabric before you cut it out. Because I'm not cording the whole thing, I'm going to approach this half like normal corset boning and half like a proper cording method. I have attached the twill tape at the front edges because that section needed to be stitched down first, since those are going to be affected by the bias binding going over the front edge. They recommend using a zipper foot to stitch as close along the other side of the cording, because normally what you would do is run a stitch as close to the edges of the 2 fabrics you're sandwiching the cording into as possible, put the first length of cord in, and then with the zipper foot stitch along the other side of the cording as close as possible to hold that cording in place. So that is what I'm gonna do. I have my machine. It took me a minute to find my zipper foot. It was lost in my drawer instead of being in the box it's supposed to be in. But I've got it all set up with the zipper foot. You can see here, this is the cording. This is just the loose bit of twill tape. I've got it pinned in a couple places down here. And I'm gonna take my time with this. And then with these, I'm just gonna try to center the twill tape over the seam allowance and stitch about an 1/8 of an inch out from one side of the seam allowance. I will even mark where the seam allowance is on the twill tape on this side so that I can see where my line is. I'll stitch about a 1/4 inch out, or an 1/8 of an inch from the center, the seam allowance, to stitch down the twill tape, and then I'll just run the cording with the zipper foot on each of these spots.
and that should do it. Hopefully it looks okay from the outside, but that's also why I've switched my bobbin thread to the correct blue color, so that should not be visible from the outside. I'll show you guys the result of this one when I'm done with it, so you can see kind of what it's going to look like. I'll show you this one and then one of these seam allowances so you can see what it looks like up close. There's the first length of cording attached, and here's the other side. So this line here is the bobbin stitch, which you can see is a very close blue to that fabric. From here you can't even see it. You're seeing the green here by my thumbnail and closer to the edge, but the actual blue is practically invisible from this side. But yeah, there's our first length of cording. So now I'll try to get the seam allowance fastened. Slight tip, when you're using twill tape or anything else made out of polyester, if it keeps fraying on you, lightly kiss the edge with a flame. This is part of why I usually have a candle lit while I'm working. It also helps me with focusing, but the uncut end of my twill tape kept fraying, so to help my sanity, I've just lightly passed it through the flame, just enough to get rid of the fray, and now it's melted, so it's not going to fray as easily. There's a few sections where the twill tape has come up. I really don't want to have to pick this seam though. Basically what has happened is I left too much edge on this side, so stretching it over the cording, it could not make all the way over to form a proper seam allowance on the other side with the zipper foot pressing it out of the way. It looks mostly clean from the outside. There's two spots here where the stitching goes into the actual seam allowance, but I'm gonna leave it for now. If I decide toward the end of this that I really want to fix it, I will undo it and fix it. But yeah, that's 2 lengths of cording. I'm gonna stop recording and let my camera charge and try to get the rest of these done. Okay, I got all of the cording in, including the inner ones on the front. I totally didn't almost forget. This lining looks so good in here. Look at this. Oh, I'm so happy with it. Okay, so all the cording and twill tape is in. So now the next step is to flatline the whole thing by attaching the entire lining layer into the outer shell. So I have it pinned around the outside, and I will do that next, but it is about 4:45, so I need to go pick up Chris from work. Depending when we get back, I may get set up to stream right away after we get home, because the sooner I stream and the stricter I am with streaming no more than 3 hours, the sooner I can get back to this and hopefully get it almost done. I am gonna hand do the eyelets. That will take the longest because I will have to hand sew them. Depending on how long that takes, it really is a toss-up of whether you're gonna see this one first or the VOD first this week. But that is the one thing that will slow me down, is that I am going to do the eyelets by hand entirely. Because I mean, even if I were to coat them with thread, it would take a while. I don't know if I have enough eyelets to do what I'm trying to do. Yeah, I'm gonna go hang this on the form and go pick up Chris. And then next you see me working, I will be attaching the lining and doing the binding, and then we will mark out our eyelets. It is about 10:30. I finished streaming about an hour ago and took some time to take care of some general housekeeping afterward, creating the highlights out of the stream and then downloading the VOD so that I can edit it down for YouTube later. So now I'm going to attach the lining to the outer shell, and from there we'll see about fitting it over the shift to see where it needs to be cut down so that it's not too long to properly fit over the hips. I will mark where it needs to be cut and trim down the whole thing. I'm a little nervous about cutting over the cording, but I think it'll be fine. And I'll probably run a second stitch along the new
hem just to hold everything together before I attach the bias binding. So let's go through those steps and then we'll see where we sit time-wise. I'm not sure I'm gonna go past midnight tonight. Luckily, tomorrow, being Thursday, I will not be going to the gym after I bring Chris to work, so I'll have an extra hour to kind of work on this.
Thousands of guests gather, cast members of the community, and you. Congratulations. Disney Cruise Line has announced some details. DVC members can call member service.
I think this is probably just going to be like what happens every couple months.
Somebody, once again, does not want me getting any work done. I got the bottom of the bodice trimmed. Unfortunately, because of the method we used to try to fit it down, there's a very small spot in the middle of the back piece that ended up cut a little higher than it should be. However, Alice has explained that she's not really that picky about it. If it looks like that at the end, it looks like that at the end. I do still need to apply the bias binding, which will extend the bottom back down very slightly and hopefully make it less noticeable. And she told me, you know, she wears her apron and her belt and several other things around her waist enough that the unevenness at the back should be less noticeable. So she has given me the go-ahead that it's fine, it's not a big deal. Please just finish it. As picky as I would be about it and try to figure out some sort of piecing to fix it, I'm concerned that any attempts I make to piece something on to fix that spot would just exacerbate an issue and make it look even worse. So we're gonna leave it. I'm gonna run a basting stitch to hold the bottom edge together, and then we are gonna start applying the bias binding. I think I will do the arm size first, because those are trickier, but will also hypothetically take less time because it's less of the tape that is necessary for it. And then I will bind the outer edge in its entirety. Let's run that basting stitch and we'll start binding. Done. There are several spots at the edge binding that did not catch on the other side, where I'm going to need to go back with needle and thread to tack them down just to the lining. Now that it's edge bound, I am going to mark all of my eyelets in these channels here where I want them to go, and I will be offsetting them, and I'll grab my awl and my scissors and needle and thread, and I will sit and thread bind some eyelets, and she's done. She's basically done. She's almost entirely done. And I'm so happy with it. I think it looks so much better than the original one, especially because I managed to get the binding to be much, much narrower along the edges. And I just, I'm very, very happy with it. Very, very happy with it. The new and improved bodice. I am so happy with it, and once again I'm very proud of Alirien for the work that she has done. There is a bit of weirdness with these straps, and I think it has to do with the pattern she used. It's very difficult to correct this sort of curve if you're not shaped the way that the pattern maker assumes people to be shaped. So we'll need to do some refitting here, and I think that will solve a bit of the gapping in the back. When it comes down right down to the waistband of the skirt, it's much better. It fits much more snugly. We could even take in a little bit more of the girth to suck in a bit tighter, but it feels much more sturdy than the last one. I'm very, very, very pleased with it, and I can still bend at the waist if I really need to and not snap any wood, so that is the most important part. But I'm very, very happy with it. I am so chuffed, so chuffed at all of the work that's been done and all of these pieces, and I'm so happy and proud to wear these and show her craftsmanship with these pieces. I hope you have enjoyed this series, this journey as well. I'm told there is one more thing we will be filming about all of my dressing material, and then you will get to meet someone new. And if my opinion is anything to go by, you will all very, very much love the new individual who will be gracing your screens when Alirien is done with the next project. Thank you all so much for watching. We really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I'm told you know where the buttons and the links are at this point. If you'd like to see more like this video specifically, there is a playlist linked up here and down there somewhere on this marvelous screen thing. If you would like to find more of Alirien's adventures in other places, you can find a Linktree portal down below as well. And she's asked that I thank on her behalf her lovely coven of patrons who continue to be the most important and most pivotal supporters of her content. And if you would like to join their guild, you can find the Patreon portal within that link tree as mentioned below. Do stay tuned for the very last part of the series about my garb, as well as more game videos and the beginnings of the very next garb project, and we shall see you all very soon. Keep aiming, my loves. And from all of us back in 1565, Sláinte.